Hey class, this is the second UV unwrapping tutorial. In this one, we're going to cover some techniques for dealing with tiling textures. So on Discord, you're going to have access to this lab UV block. So I downloaded the zip file, I copied it to my Max 2023 scenes directory. I'm just going to right click on it and say extract all. I'm going to stick with the defaults and say extract. So now you see there's an actual proper folder, not the one with the little zipper. So I'm going to select this and hit delete. That was on the zip file. So I'm going to open up this lab UV block. I'm going to copy this path. I'm going to come over here and say file, open. And I'm going to paste that path there and hit enter, which navigates me to the folder. I can then click on the Max file and say open. You may get this error message or this warning saying that the file was made in a student version of 3ds Max. It was made in a teaching copy. It's totally fine. You can just say continue. All right, so this is what you're going to see. Let's come up here to default shading and click and say wireframe override. Nope, that's the wrong thing. Sorry, default shading. Click on it and say edged faces. There we go. All right, so let's click on our mesh so you can see you have a shape. What we want to do is we want to get some tiling surfaces on it, and I'm going to provide you with maps for these. Let's go ahead and hit M on our keyboard for material, or just hit the material editor icon here. All right, so this is the material, and you could see in the material editor, the material is already built for you. All right, you have the multi-sub object, right? And if I double click on the icon, you could see it has little hash marks in the corner, which means it is assigned. You can even right click and say select and select by material. And it'll show you that the one mesh that's in here, UV block, actually has that material assigned to it. Now it does have some objects, or it does have the different materials assigned to it, 1, 2, and 3. If I double click on these images, you'll see what the maps look like. All right. So I paused the tutorial. I wanted to give you a different texture to use. I didn't want to use the one texture that was in here. I wanted to provide a different one. So there we go. So I just swapped out the brick for a different one. And that's the one you'll see when you open up the file. All right, so everything's set up. We have our textures. They're all assigned. When we look at our object, there's no image showing up. Now, what's happening here is I actually went in, there's a tool here under utilities. If you click on more, if your mesh is an edit poly, you can actually use UV remove and it will strip all the UVs from a mesh, right? So I want to make sure this had nothing to begin with. I want to make sure it was a blank slate. So let's go ahead and close the material editor. What we need to do to start is we're going to put a UVW map. Now, as I mentioned in the previous UV tutorial, if you set up your configure modifier sets, which was the last thing I had you do in the Max start, you'll be good to go. All your modifiers will here. If not, go back and set up your modifier sets, or you can always just click here from the list and search to find the various modifiers. We're going to start with UVW Map. So UVW Map is sort of like you have the scalpel, which is Unwrap UVW, which is for going through and manipulating hand by hand. And UVW Map just is something that just blasts everything that you currently have selected with UVs. The default is planar. It has a sub-object of a gizmo, which I can shift and move around. I'm going to right-click to stop that though. Let's go up to UVW Map. I'm going to set it to box. And because all of the textures I provided you are square textures, I want to have square values for the box portion of this. And so if you look, the length and width are the same. So I'm going to copy that value and paste it into height. So now you see, if I click up here in orbit, you see how my texture is tiling quite nicely on the block. All right. So we have brick, and the brick looks okay, looks pretty good. If we come up here, the wood looks okay, but my trim texture looks odd. So I'm going to hit the material editor. I'm going to double click on this guy. If you double click on the icon, it does bring up its properties, but it changes the icon larger and smaller. If you just click on the little label at the top, it'll just pop that open. So I'm up here on the trim, and over here in the bitmap parameters, I'm going to click View Image. So what this is a trim texture. This isn't anything that's meant to map across the surface of an object like on a wall. What it is this is for the little details that are cut into a model, the little things that make it look like it was man-made or manufactured, something that's real. So what we're going to do is we're going to map these upper polygons that kind of make up the upper edge. We're going to map it to this texture. So it looks like there's a layer of brick going all the way around, and the texture actually wraps around. So let's look at how to do that. So first things first, the UVW map's great for going in and creating an initial set of UVs. If we right click and say convert to edit poly, that makes that initial set of UVs permanent, which is what we want, because it was so quick and fast for us to do that. We could always go back and do it again if we need to. But what we need to do at this point is we need to go in and start manipulating these individual polygons. So let's click Unwrap UVW, and I'm going to do Open UV. And again, if you remember from before, there's this selection preview. If you like that, by all means leave it on. I personally like to go into Options, Preferences, and turn off selection preview. All right, let's kind of shift this over to the side a little bit and hold this, move it over. I'm going to hit the little zoom extents all to zoom out. So up here at the top, the checker pattern, I can come down and I can view my various different textures. There's also an option, if I come down here to the bottom, because I do have multi sub-object materials, let's pop that open again. If I double click on the main parent, you see it has the name of the materials. Now I named these materials, and because I did, in addition to having the different ID numbers, it has the names, which makes it a lot easier to go through and select those. And what this does is it allows you to go through, if I just click 3C brick, it selects only the polygons that have bricks, the brick material assigned to them. Now, previously I showed you how you can stitch things together, right? And so what that means is anywhere you see a green line, it means that the polygons or the vertex points in UV space are not connected. Where there's a white line, it means they are. And so even though I'm only seeing polygons that have brick on them, if I select this and move it, you see how it distorts those trims? Let's Control R to orbit around here. Zoom in with my middle mouse wheel. So I'm just region selecting, I'm grabbing all these bricks, I'm going to move them. And even though I'm only selecting the brick, you see how those trim are reacting? That's because if I come up here to all IDs, you'll see that the brick is still attached in UV space to the trim. And so when I start to move the brick, the trim also gets adjusted. And the reason I'm showing it that way is we are going to start selecting these individual trims and moving them, which is going to mess up the brick. So here's an easy way to separate them. I'm going to come down here to brick. I'm going to click and region select everything I see, come to explode, and then hit the break button. So now you see that those UVs are separated. So now if I move the brick, nothing's going to happen to the trims. And so the flip side of that is if I come up here to my strip texture, if I start grabbing these and moving these around, it's not going to mess up my brick, right? And just keep in mind, even though the brick may look good in one view, always always double check what you're doing. Make sure that you're not accidentally moving something else in another viewport. So here's kind of what I want to do. I'm going to take two of these. I'm going to hit F2 so you see shaded. I'm going to select these two. I'm going to hit explode. And I'm going to use this yellow. I'm going to constrain my movement, move it up. And let's go into edge. I'm going to use a little tool here where if I select one edge, you see how this other edge here is turning blue? Now you can see that because I moved it. There's going to be other cases where if I click on an edge here, you see how you get a large bounding box? That's because there's more than one edge that's selected and the bounding box is grabbing them both. There you go. When I turn this on, this corresponding edge turns blue. The point of this is that if I click on one edge and I use these stitch buttons, the one on the far right is Stitch Custom. It'll take whatever edge is connected to the one you have selected and move it over. So if I do that, see now they're connected, now there's that white line, they're stitched together in UV space. If I region select, I can move them to line up here on this brick. And what I want to do is I want to adjust it so that it looks like the edge wraps around, but you don't have like a weird ending where it just kind of ends like this. I want it to match kind of at like an ambient portion, which currently our brick is not, and we're going to come back and fix that later. So let's just grab all this. I'm just going to move it down. I'm also going to rotate it. There we go. And so I want to set the base of it right down here where this ambient edge is of this round brick. It kind of gets a little bit dark there. And then I'm just going to grab this top part, just raise it up just a little. So now it looks like, let's go here to create, so you know, see the edges in F4. See how it gets a little bit dark? It's almost like there's a little slight groove in the brick, and then up there as well. But now we're trying to make it look like it's actually made out of a surface. And we could probably tune that more if we want to make that look even better. Maybe we'll offset it. So now those pieces will be in the corner. So now we need to do that with all of our other trim sections. So let's talk about how to do that. I'm going to come up here. Let's go click on this little all IDs, select our strips. Let's go ahead and just, I'm going to erase it. I'm going to come down here. I have this, I'm just going to not worry about this piece. I'm going to region select these center rows, and I'm going to hit explode to break them, so now I can move them without moving any others. The reason I'm region selecting them is if I hit F2 so you can see them, you'll notice the sort of bounding box you get. There are polygons on the top and bottom, and we want to work with both. So now I'm going to use my quick transform to rotate them. So now I'm rotating all my rows together. Oh, I have this, it looks like, what's going on here? I think maybe is my wood, looks like my wood may still be attached to something. It's attached to this one down here. Let's break that. I noticed that because there was, after I rotated those, there were edges there and there shouldn't have been. So now if I come into strip, there we go. So now we just have those rows. Perfect. All right, so let's go through and let's start stitching stuff together. I'm just going to start grabbing edges here. I just clicked 2 to switch to edge. I'm going to start clicking on edges and start stitching them. And I may have to just come through and just click in this viewport. I'm only stitching these ones that make up where the trim is, right? When your UVs are done, not everything has to be stitched together because that would frankly be impossible. All right, looks like I got everything stitched. Now I just want to align them all. So I have my guide, which is kind of over here. Let's grab everything else. So if I grab this row down here, rotate that, and then I can move it up. I'll grab these and rotate them and lower them down. And then I can grab all of them and kind of move them over. And if the image, your reference gets in the way, you can turn it off like that. So let's maximize this. All right, so I kind of want to get all these to kind of line up. I'll hold Alt and deselect the one that's the lowest. Maybe if I just double click, there we go. Now I can work to line them all up. Sometimes I'll need to grow them to grow my selection. Okay, there we go. And now let's just go into vertex. I want to grab this row, align horizontal, align horizontal, align horizontal, and then I can align vertical. You need to try to keep close to the original shape. I don't want to take this top polygon and make it perfectly rectangular You need to keep that angle because if you don't, the display of the texture will be distorted. Let's turn our primary texture back on. So we could always tune this if we didn't really like how it looks. I think it looks okay. We can certainly take it and move it to another spot if we want to try something else. We can move it over here. Let's grab our freeform tool. Just be careful, the more you distort it, the more you run the risk. Texture maybe looks stretched. And it's just something you got to kind of eyeball. All right, there we go. Kind of like that a little bit more. I think that looks good. So see what we're talking about? It has that illusion that it actually has the detail of this built surface. So let's right click, convert that to poly. All right. I like how we have our little ambient edge. I don't like how the main brick doesn't line up. All right, so let's fix that. I'm going to come in here, go to polygon. I'm going to click on one of these brick surfaces. I see that as ID3, so I'm going to click select ID3. Now here's something fun. Because I am in the sub-object, I have something selected. If I put a UVW map on, it will only be applied to what I have selected, just like when we did the top hat, where we tapered the top and we bent the brim. All right. Both of those times we had something specific selected and when we applied it to that. So I'll put a box on here and we have our values. Before I told you to type it in to square it off. What I'm going to do is instead I'm going to change my tiling values. So I'm changing my V, right, the up and down. It's value of 2. What's set to a value of 3, which looks really good. All right. So basically the bottom of that UV is at down here, the top of the texture is up there, and now we're just tiling it vertically 3 times. And that's looking pretty good because it actually lines up here where the ambient edge of it sits at the bottom. Just right click and convert that to poly. If I go into polygon and just click a negative space, nothing else will be selected now. But there we go. Now that's, you know, kind of just an introduction to doing UV mapping with tiling textures. All right, so go ahead and take a snip of this and turn this project in for me.